The year is 476 AD. A teenage barbarian king walks into the imperial palace, sits across from the last Roman emperor, a 16-year-old boy named Romulus Augustulus, and tells him he's done. No battle, no siege, no burning city. The boy hands over the crown without a fight. And just like that, the greatest empire in Western history ends, not with an explosion, with paperwork. For 1,500 years, historians have been arguing about what killed Rome: the barbarians, the corruption, the lead pipes, the military. Every generation picks a new culprit. But there is something sitting in the Roman record that almost none of those books spend more than a paragraph on. Something the Romans themselves noticed, something they even had a name for. And when you see it, you won't be able to look at Rome the same way again. You also won't be able to look at yourself the same way. To understand what happened, you have to go back to what Rome actually was before it became an empire. 753 BC, a city on 7 hills, small, violent, surrounded by enemies. Being Roman meant something specific back then. Roman men farmed their own land, served in the legions when called, fought beside the men they grew up with, and came home to do it again. The Roman word for virtue, virtues, came from the word for man, vir. To be virtuous was to be capable of doing hard things. The system asked everything of the people inside it, and it worked. Over 5 centuries, it built the most effective civilization the ancient world had ever seen. They didn't build an empire because they were lucky. They built it because every Roman had a role, a real one, and they filled it or they died trying. Then the wealth arrived, fast, all at once. 146 BC, Rome destroys Carthage, absorbs the entire North African grain supply, conquers Greece in the same year. Within a generation, money and slaves are flooding in at a rate the city has never experienced. And the Roman state starts doing something that would have been unthinkable a century earlier. It starts giving things away. The grain dole begins in 123 BC, subsidized at first, then free. By the height of the empire, somewhere between 150,000 and 320,000 people in the city of Rome are receiving free grain every single month. Free bread. Just for existing. But that's only the beginning. The public baths, the thermae, open to nearly everyone for almost nothing. The baths of Caracalla hold 1,600 people at once. Libraries, gardens, hot rooms, cold rooms, warm rooms. You could spend an entire day inside for less than the price of a loaf of bread. The gladiatorial games, free. The chariot races at the Circus Maximus, which seated 250,000 people, the largest stadium the ancient world ever built, free. Paid for by the state, by wealthy patrons competing for political favor. The Roman calendar at the height of the empire had 135 official public holidays, 135 days a year, where the expectation was simple. You are not working, you are watching something. A Roman poet named Juvenal looked at all of this in 100 AD and wrote 2 words, panem et circenses, bread and circuses. He wasn't celebrating it. He was issuing a warning. He wrote that the Roman people, who had once controlled armies and elections and the fate of the world, had surrendered everything in exchange for free food and free entertainment. The Romans read it and went back to the races. Here's where it gets strange, because what followed wasn't a sudden collapse. It was something much harder to see. For roughly 200 years after Juvenal's warning, Rome continued to function. The roads ran, the legions marched, the aqueducts delivered water. From the outside, the empire looked intact. But historians who read the letters from inside Rome during this period noticed something the military accounts miss: a change in texture, a change in what Romans were writing about, caring about. The letters from the 1st century BC, Caesar, Cicero, Cato, are full of politics, philosophy, civic debate. These men are obsessed with the Republic, with their role in it, with how history would remember them. By the 3rd century AD, the surviving letters read differently: more complaints, more boredom, more obsession with the outcomes of chariot races. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing in the 4th century, describes the Roman aristocracy calculating how many miles they've traveled for pleasure, competing over the size of their dinner parties, treating libraries their ancestors built as temples, as tombs, never visited. The empire was still there. The people inside it had quietly stopped caring about anything it was built on. And the military records tell the rest of the story. In the early republic, the legions were built from Roman citizens, men with land to come home to, men who had something personal at stake in every battle. By the 3rd century, recruiting Roman citizens into the legions had become nearly impossible, not because there weren't enough of them, because they didn't want to go. The state began hiring soldiers from the Germanic tribes, from the edges of the empire, men who fought for wages. And when the wages became uncertain, their loyalty became uncertain too. Historian Adrian Goldsworthy put it simply: the Roman Empire didn't run out of soldiers, it ran out of Romans who believed the empire was worth fighting for. Seneca saw it coming. Writing in the 1st century AD, he described something that reads less like philosophy and more like a quiet warning. He wrote that the human soul needs difficulty the way the body needs exercise, that without resistance, without something genuinely hard, it turns inward. It seeks stimulation wherever it can find it: in spectacle, in complaint, in watching the suffering of others from a safe distance. He was writing about the gladiatorial games, but he was writing about something else too. Now consider this. In 2004, the average time a person could focus on a single screen before switching was 2.5 minutes. Today, it is 47 seconds. Rome had 135 public holidays a year, and Juvenal considered it a civilizational warning. The Circus Maximus seated 250,000 people. It was open on race days. The device in your pocket is open every second of every day, and it is run by people whose entire business depends on you never putting it down. Historian Brian Ward Perkins spent years looking at what actually happened after 476 AD. Not the theories, the physical record, pottery quality, roof tile complexity, literacy rates, long-distance trade. Every measurable indicator of civilizational complexity in Western Europe collapsed after Rome fell, and took 3 to 5 centuries to recover. His conclusion is simple: civilizations are not self-sustaining. They require people who believe, generation after generation, that maintaining them is worth the cost. When enough people stop believing that, when comfort becomes more interesting than contribution, the structure begins to hollow, quietly, slowly, from the inside. Juvenal wrote his warning in 100 AD. The last emperor handed over his crown 376 years later. The people in between lived full lives, ate their grain, watched their races, had children who grew up believing the whole thing was permanent. It wasn't. Nothing built by human hands ever is. Not the roads, not the institutions, not the capacity for difficult thought. Those things have to be chosen, passed on, rebuilt by every generation that inherits them. The Circus Maximus is gone. What it represented is not. It just fits in your pocket now.